think that your government's too big? Anybody think that we ignore the Constitution at our own peril? A business like this, Royal Kitchen and Bath, how do they succeed? How are they succeeding with all of the obstacles we place in their way? We have a tax code that's 70,000 pages. You saw what I'd like to do it, burn it, put it in the wood chipper. Every politician comes to town and says, I'm going to save your jobs. I'm going to do something to create jobs. Well, why are our jobs leaving America? Why are our jobs going overseas? And why are companies reincorporating overseas? Because our taxes are too damn high. We can't monkey around with the tax code. We can't massage it or remove a page here and there. We have to get rid of the whole damn thing. We would replace it with a tax return that you can put on one page. 14.5% for businesses like Chris's, 14.5% for individuals. Everybody pays the same rate. Democrats will say, oh, that's only for rich people. Part of my response is, when's the last time you worked for a poor person? Rich people create jobs because they take risks. But our taxes will go one step further. Our tax plan will eliminate the payroll tax. No more FICA, no more payroll tax. If you make $40,000 a year, you don't pay much income tax, but you pay about $2,000 in FICA. We eliminate that, and it gets paid out of the payroll tax. It's the first item. So we completely fund Social Security, we completely fund Medicare, and there are a few other things in government. You know what? We might have to cut some of government. Now the Democrats will also say, but where would we cut? We've cut to the bone. I have a list of about 100 things I could tell we've got. I'm going to tell you 3 of them. We spent 600 grand, nearly 700 grand, studying whether or not it relieves stress in the Vietnamese to watch American reruns on TV. I'm not making this up. We spent $10 million to reinterpret and translate Sesame Street into Pakistani. $10 million. We spent $800,000 in Afghanistan to televise a cricket league. Do you know how many people have a TV in Afghanistan? 1 out of every 10,000 people has a TV. But where's the money coming from? Doesn't grow on trees. We're either printing it up or borrowing it from China. We borrow money from China to send it to Pakistan. Is that crazy? That's insane. We borrow money from China to send it to Pakistan, to send it to Egypt, to send it to Libya, you name it. So when we had a big thing going on with the Muslim Brotherhood took over Egypt, I said, well, doesn't sound like they're our friends. Just guessing, all right? So let's cut off sending them tanks and arms and planes and billions of dollars that we must borrow from China first. You know how many votes I had? 22 people voted with me, all Republicans, but about 25 Republicans voted no, and every Democrat voted to keep sending your money to Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. That's what's wrong with your country. Your representatives aren't representing you. None of you want that, and yet your senators and congressmen keep voting to send this money around the world. I introduced another amendment in the Foreign Relations Committee. It said that we shouldn't send money, any money, to countries that persecute Christians, and we defined that by just so you think I'm not just making up what that means, we defined it by the death penalty being persecution. Sounds like persecution to me. death penalty or life imprisonment for interfaith marriage, changing your religion, or saying something critical about the state religion. It's about 25 countries that have those laws on the books, and they do enforce them, and yes, you do send money to them. In Pakistan, there's a woman by the name of Asia Bibi. She went to draw water from the well, and as she did, the women of the village and the men of the village began beating her with sticks and stoning her. As she lay bleeding on the ground, yelling and crying out for help, the police finally came and arrested her. They accused her of being critical of the state religion. She sits on death row in Pakistan while you continue to plow money, billions after billions, into Pakistan. You know what? We've got some problems at home. Why don't we look at rebuilding America? People sometimes ask me, what's the worst thing the president's doing to the country? And I tell them, how long do you have? I got a long list and I can talk a long time. But if I wanted to sum it all up, it isn't just Obamacare, which was terrible for the country. It wasn't just the banking regulations that's killing the ability of businesses, local businesses, to get loans, or homeowners to get loans. If you want to sum it all up, what the president is doing to the country, oh, that's right, didn't he used to live just down the road from here? Would y'all like him back? But we want to know what the worst thing he's done? It's the collapse of the separation of powers. He's gobbling up and grabbing all the power for the presidency for unelected bureaucrats, and we're going to stop him. One of the greatest things our founders gave us was that they divided the power. We're supposed to have co-equal branches of government, and Madison said we would pit ambition against ambition. The ambition of Congress to try to get more power against the president to try to get more power against the judiciary. And they would check and balance each other. Hadn't been working so well for us. This president got defeated in the Congress, in the House, and in the Senate. Now he says, I've got my phone, I've got my pen, I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want. That's a problem. Montesquieu described it this way. Montesquieu is one of the philosophers that our founders looked to and helped us to come up with the idea of co-equal branches. Montesquieu said that when the executive, the president, when the executive begins to legislate, a form of tyranny will ensue. That's what we're facing, my friends. We're facing a form of tyranny. We won't call him a tyrant, all right, we won't go there. But the thing is this is the fear when so much power gravitates in the hands of one person. And it's not just this president. It happened with previous presidents. When you got a Republican president, Republican Congress, they say, give him more power. That's our guy or our gal. Give him more power. Republicans have been guilty of this as well. Your congressmen and your senators are guilty because they give up the power. If we fought tooth and nail and said we're not going to let that happen, we could stop them. I think every regulation should be voted on by Congress. The regulatory code may be hurting businesses more than the taxes. It's just as long. Tens of thousands of pages of regulatory code, and you know what? I don't ever get to vote on any of it. The thing on greenhouse gases, we should debate and Congress should vote on it. He's going to do this by royal edict. An unelected bureaucrat does this and we have no way to stop him. This is a real problem. So not only do you need a new president, you largely need a new, stronger, and more constitutional Congress. People say, well, how are we going to win? There's about 18 states we haven't won in 30 some odd years in the presidency. I think Illinois might be one of them. It's tough to win in the bigger states when you have bigger turnout in the presidential years. And it's very simple why. We don't get enough African American vote. We have to get more African American vote if we're going to win. That's why I was here 3 weeks ago on the south side of Chicago with an African-American minister who has his own private school down there, who many of the people I met that day came up to me and said one thing about Chicago. The money allocated for the poor never reaches the poor. It's gobbled up by the Chicago machine. You got to be related to somebody to get some. So I've got a proposal for the people who live on the south side of Chicago, or for anybody that hasn't been paying attention to us. We're going to help alleviate poverty. We're going to help alleviate childlessness, but we're not going to do what the Democrats have done. The Democrats have been gobbling up your money since the 1960s, since the war of poverty began, and then sending it back. Problem is, there's people in the middle gobbling and eating their fair share before it gets back to the places of poverty. What I want to do is the opposite. Not take your money and then send it back. Never take your money to begin with. Leave it in the community. I have a specific tax cut for those who live in poverty. It's even above and beyond our flat tax. It's called economic freedom zones. If you have high unemployment and chronic high poverty, we'll cut your taxes to almost nothing for 10 years. It adds up to a large amount of money. For the south side of Chicago, it will be nearly $3 billion over 10 years. We have to have a debate in our country about how jobs are created and who creates them. There are two parts to the economy. The productive economy, and I'm looking at it, and if you want to see the non-productive economy, look at Congress. They don't make anything, they don't produce anything, they consume your hard-earned dollars. And it makes no sense to send your money to Washington and say, oh, come back to Chicago and give us some. Do you know what happens? They give it to their cronies. They give it to their contributors. Has anybody ever heard of Solyndra?
Yes.
This is one of the richest men in our country. Why would we be loaning tax dollars to a very wealthy guy? He should go to the bank and get his own money. But it just turns out to be a coincidence that he's a big donor of President Obama. Imagine that. This is the problem. But here's the other problem. We have in our country something called democratic capitalism. Every day someone votes on whether Royal Kitchen and Bath succeeds. Every day they come through the door and they vote. If they buy his stuff here, Chris will succeed. If they don't, he won't. It's harsh, but that's the way business works. But we know after a few years, he's been in business 10 years, he's doing something right. So if we lower the taxes for a business that exists and has employees and sells something, we know it's going to productive use. But what if I take your money and I come back and I say, oh, Mr. Smith, you'd be good at running a business. Here's $1 million, start a business. We have no idea whether that person's good at business. That's what the marketplace figures out. So imagine dollar for dollar. That we borrow $1 billion from China and we pass it out to somebody who we select, usually because they were a political donor, versus giving it back to people who you've already voted for by going to their business. We're talking about a stimulus that would create millions and millions of jobs. When Ronald Reagan cut taxes, that's what happened. But it's been since Ronald Reagan, since we've had a Republican who seriously and honestly and forthrightly wanted to cut your taxes. We need a nominee who will cut taxes and cut the size of government. What passes for gold in Washington is this, and I kid you not, the head of all the tax committees are Republican. If you ask them what they want revenue-neutral tax reform. Anybody here going to knock on a door for a politician who wants revenue-neutral tax reform? It means that half of you will pay more and half of you will pay less, and the net result on the economy is zero. I'm not leaving my practice. If that's what we're for, I'm going home. I've got no time to be for nothing. We should be for cutting taxes and making government smaller, growing a productive sector and creating jobs. To win again, we don't need to dilute what we stand for. We need to be more boldly for what we are for. But we also have to reach out to new constituencies. Almost everybody in the Republican Party, including all 55 candidates for president, are probably pretty decent on the Second Amendment. If you don't believe me, come to my house unannounced, all right? But we're doing pretty well there. What about some of the other amendments that might attract new people to our party? The Fourth Amendment is your right to be left alone. And you may see a dust-up on the presidential stage next week because there's a lot of Republicans. I can think of 2 or 3 who, it's their favorite thing about President Obama is collecting all your phone records. They love it, and they compliment the president about collecting your phone records. Well, I've got a better plan. Let's collect more records of terrorists and less records of innocent Americans. Every day, your local policemen obey the Constitution. If you have a potential murderer or rapist, and they think they've got him in their house, they didn't see him go in, it's 3 in the morning, what does the policeman do? Calls a judge. And do you think he gets a warrant? Almost always. I'm a big privacy advocate, but if I'm the judge and they say there's a terrorist in there and I have X amount of information, it doesn't have to be proof. It has to be some suspicion and information. They call me at 3 in the morning, I'm going to say, go in and get the records. Same with murderers, same with rapists. All of the bad things that have been happening while we're collecting records of everyone. The Boston bombing occurred while we collected all of your records. The Chattanooga shooting just recently happened. We're still collecting records. It has not stopped. Remember Major Hassan, Fort Hood? We were collecting all of your records. And guess what? In every instance, we had some suspicion, and we weren't doing anything about it. The Russians tipped us off to the Boston bombing. Major Hassan was writing crazy stuff about killing Americans and Christians for a dozen years, and nobody stopped him. We kept promoting him because we're always afraid to fire somebody. That's a whole other story in itself. We can't fire people from the VA who were lying about waiting times. We found people at the EPA who were downloading porn 6 hours a day, and you say, well, they're fired, right? You can't fire anybody. They found one guy at the EPA, a guy named, blanking on his name, but he was a second-hand man to Eugene McCarthy at the very top. You know what he was doing? For 11 years, he never was coming to work, but he kept getting promoted. They said, why? They asked his boss, and they said, well, he's in the CIA. And they're like, really? So they did something extraordinary. They called the CIA. You know what the CIA said? Jonathan who? And so I imagine what he was doing for 11 years. Had to have a swimming pool because he made a lot of money. Laying by a swimming pool, he's drinking a beer. When his boss calls and says, are you coming in? He's like, no, I'm in Istanbul on secret assignment. To win, we got to be a bigger party. We got to defend the whole Bill of Rights. Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth and Sixth Amendment, the amendments of justice. Government should never take your property from one private property owner and give it to another. Under the Supreme Court decision Kelo, they can take it from a homeowner and give it to a retailer because a retailer pays more in taxes. They have tried to take it from an individual, from a church, and give it to a business because the church doesn't pay taxes. Property rights are not relative. We got our rights from our Creator, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let the government take them away from us. The 9th and 10th Amendment says that those rights not listed in the Bill of Rights are not to be disparaged. It's a small listing of your rights. Your rights are unenumerated. They're infinite. They come from our Creator. If you don't believe in God, they're still yours naturally. The government can't take them away. And the powers that we gave to the federal government are limited and enumerated. And what we didn't give to the federal government are left to the people in the states. We shouldn't allow government to keep gobbling up power. The Sixth Amendment says that you have a right to trial by jury. And you think, well, who could possibly oppose that? Well, let me think. We passed a bill a couple years ago that allows American citizens to be indefinitely detained without a trial, without a lawyer. But when you think about it, you think, oh, there's bad people. Maybe we have to do this to bad people. They have a list of the criteria for people you're supposed to report, your neighbor that you're supposed to turn in. People with missing fingers, people who have stains on their clothing. They might be a bomb maker if they're missing fingers and have stains on their clothing. Or they might be a farmer. Or a bad coffee drinker. You're supposed to turn in people who have changed the color of their hair. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. You're also supposed to be suspicious of people who have multiple guns in the household, or weatherproof ammunition, or like to pay in cash. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands there either. But if these are the criteria, I want my lawyer before they come to my house. The thing is we have to be very careful that in our ability to protect ourselves from terrorism, we don't give up on who we are. There's a young man in my neighboring town that my wife and I helped with a house for through his veterans group. He lost both legs and an arm. And when you ask him what he fought for, he says the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Wouldn't it be sad if while he was gone, defending his country, that he came back and we had given up on the Bill of Rights? That's our job. If you're not fighting, you need to be here defending the Bill of Rights with the rest of us. The Sixth Amendment says you have a right to a speedy trial. Khalif Browder was a 16-year-old black kid from the Bronx, accused of a crime. Incidentally, from someone who did not live in this country, wasn't here legally, and never showed up for trial. He spent 3 years in prison, 2 years in solitary confinement. He tried to commit suicide, and then just about a month ago did commit suicide. This shouldn't happen in America. And if you want a bigger party, what I'm saying to you is let's defend the Sixth Amendment just as much as the Second Amendment. The Bill of Rights is for everyone, but the Bill of Rights is importantly for the least among us. It's for minorities. And people say, well, I'm not a minority. You can be a minority because of the color of your skin or the shade of your ideology. You can be a minority because you're an evangelical Christian, because you teach your kids at home, or maybe even because you believe in the Constitution. The thing is, we want to protect individual rights. That means having your day in court, having a lawyer. We've done some things in our country that have gotten out of control. We are putting people in jail for nonviolent drug crimes for decades and decades, some people for life. But it's even worse than that. When you look at the people arrested for marijuana, it's 15-to-1 black to white. You say, well, maybe they're smoking more dope. There's 10% of the population, and when you do surveys, white kids are smoking pot too. They just live in the suburbs. The police aren't there. And I don't blame the police. The police are patrolling the city when more people are packed together, but they just, over time, our jails have become full of African Americans and Hispanics. If you want them to consider our party, let's be the party of justice. Let's be the party of justice. There's a painter by the name of Robert Henry. And he said to young painters, he said, paint like a man coming over the hill singing. I love the image of that. I think if we become the party that proclaims our message like a man coming over the hill singing, proclaims our message with the passion of Patrick Henry, then we're going to dominate, we're going to roll, we're going to win Chicago, we're going to win Illinois, and we're going to win the presidency. Thank you.